Hi, I'm Gareth Kane, and welcome to the Net Zero Business Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Nick Brown, founder of the Nikwax and Paramo outdoor brands, and more recently, founder of the climate charity Green Levers. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Now, Nikwax was keeping my feet dry on Saturday as I splodged around a Scottish island. But perhaps you could tell us about the founding story of how you created Nikwax.
Yes, I mean, Nikwax started as a business really by accident. What came along long time before that was my passion for getting out in the outdoors, which was, I think, therapy for what was a very uncomfortable experience at school. So I used to hitchhike up to Scotland and get very wet feet. And so when I started um, uh, Nikwax really effectively, I was 15 years old and trying to find a way of keeping my leather boots dry. So I went into my father's shed and started pulling things out and mixing them up. But then it was probably, yeah, 6 years later when I was finishing my university degree, when the possibility of actually turning it into a business came up, which really for me was a bit of a last resort, I have to say.
Right. And were there competing products at the time, or was this quite a novel product on the market?
Well, it all happened because I went into a shop called Alpine Sports to buy a new pair of boots because I was about to set off to the Outer Hebrides. And the manager of the shop tried to sell me something to look after the boots. And I said, well, I make it myself. And then he started asking me questions about whether I could overcome some of the problems he had with the products that he had on sale, which were at that time over softening the leather
Yeah.
and not working very well. And I said, yeah, sure, of course. And he said, oh, would you like to make some for our shop? Which I never occurred to me that I could ever sell the stuff. But then I had this idea that I was going to do a PhD in something completely unrelated, and maybe this would be a way of financing it. Well, it never became that, but in the end, it became a business.
Yeah.
So
And Nikwax, promotes its green credentials. Was that an intention of how you were starting it, or was it sort of the chance of the formulation you came up with?
I think that green credentials, I think that being concerned about the environment probably goes very well together with just loving the outdoors, to be
Mhm.
honest. Um, but I wouldn't say I started off life as an environmentalist by any means, but I certainly wanted to do it with the least amount of impact possible.
Hmm.
Um, and there's some interesting issues about chemicals and which chemicals you might use, and whether there are good chemicals and bad chemicals, which we could talk about. But I suppose it fitted with the way I felt about the environment.
Yeah. And the most notable of those chemicals is what we call PFAS. Um,
Yeah, that came much later.
yeah.
My introduction to PFAS came much later. The business had already been going for sort of something like 23 years when um, effectively some chemical reps tried to sell me fluorocarbon water repellency. We were not using fluorocarbon water repellency, never had at that point. Um, that was about the year 2000, in fact.
Yeah.
Um, and I looked at these chemicals, we had them in the laboratory and seemed all good. And then suddenly we got this terrible feedback that we couldn't use them for various reasons. And all of a sudden I became aware of the persistence of this particular family of chemicals.
Yeah.
Um, but the real story with PFAS and us got going sort of 12 years later because I made a decision that I thought that these fluorochemicals were potentially too dangerous and too toxic for us to use.
Yeah.
And the chemical reps kept on trying to persuade us that they got something new and better that was going to overcome those problems, but I was never persuaded.
Yeah. And those are colloquially known as forever chemicals because they're so persistent in the
They
environment.
are now, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And obviously, when you started the business, climate change in particular was sort of it was being discussed in scientific circles, but hadn't really burst onto the public agenda at that time. How did the sort of green side of the business develop with these new issues emerging?
Yes, I mean, I was actually quite obsessed with climate change. I think I think it was about 5 years in the late 90s when I bought I bought into Nature magazine and read every single article about climate change because I thought it was potentially a big problem. Um, and when I was finally convinced that it was something real, I actually stopped buying the Nature magazines. But I'm talking about the scientific Nature
Yeah.
magazine here. But as far as I'm concerned, I suppose my real first introduction to understanding it in any depth was when I was invited to a conference in Perth, which was called Change in the Mountains, which was put on to receive, I think, something like 200 odd scientists from 50 countries
Mhm.
who were all specialists in climate change and how it was affecting mountain areas. And eh, I went along with my 18-year-old son, who didn't know what he was doing at the time, and we were the only two who didn't have PhDs, I think. Um, and over 5 days, we became really quite well informed about climate change. And I think that the most impressive thing was that at that point, every single scientist had a story
Yeah.
from every part. It didn't matter whether it was New Zealand or Kenya or wherever. Everyone had a story, and we came back from that, both of us, aware of two things. One is that very few people understood the significance of what could happen
Hmm.
in terms of the danger to our environment, but also people's lives. And two, that the issue of communication of science was a really big issue,
Mm.
which you know about very well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then how did this first manifest itself in the business? When did you first adopt climate targets?
Very soon after that, we made a decision that we would try to offset, first of all, measure our carbon,
Mhm.
which we did in terms of our operational carbon. And we also looked for a way that we could potentially offset that.
Yeah.
Um, and that actually started off a very long-term relationship with a charity called World Land Trust, which eventually I became a trustee of for 6 years.
Yeah.
Um, but it also started off for both of us. My son eventually went off and did environmental science, and eventually he went to UEA in Norwich, and eventually to Imperial College. Um, and I got very much more interested in the science aspect of it.
Yeah. And the company now has a net zero by 2040 target.
I believe so, yes. I mean,
Yes.
I am no longer in control of the company,
Yeah.
so I having sold it to the employees, I sold it to an employment ownership trust.
Yeah.
I try very hard not to interfere with what they're doing.
Yeah. So that they've adopted that target since
Yeah.
that handover. Right. But I suppose then, did you find that any competitive advantage through the lack of PFAS, the fact that you were taking climate change seriously? Did you find that the market was responding positively to that?
To begin with, not at all.
Hmm.
Um, but I believe that certainly with regard to the PFAS, with the forever chemicals, the fact that we were the only outdoor aftercare company that didn't have them
Hmm.
and never had them Nikwax was the only company, and still is probably the only outdoor care company that never adopted them. In the long term, has has been very positive for them. I know that, particularly in the United States. But certainly for the first few years, it was of no benefit whatsoever. And at one point, it became quite problematic because one of our very large United States customers decided that we were being too outspoken about fluorocarbons, and
Oh.
we were undermining sales of jackets uh, on the shop floor, and came and told us off, actually.
Right. I've never heard of pushback.
Oh
That
yeah, I mean there was real pushback,
yeah.
and that was actually very interesting because the way that the fluorocarbon industry approached the PR was to say, yes, we have a problematic chemical, but we've got another one which is not problematic at all.
Yeah.
Um, and looking at it from sort of rule of thumb chemistry, I couldn't see any reason why their replacement chemical would not be as risky as the main one that had been shown to be persistent and carcinogenic and all the rest of it. Um, but the industry as a whole was adopting this new chemical and didn't want it to be undermined.
Right.
And I really couldn't shut up about it. And we had quite a bit of conflict around it. And at that point, it was potentially going to do our business a lot of damage.
Yeah.
The fact we'd adopted this position.
And did the claims about that new chemical stand up?
Um, no, no.
No, I
It
guess
took a
not.
few years. It took a
Yeah.
few years, and in fact, what was really interesting was that the fluorochemical industry had a plan which was based on we got the document which was the basis of their plans, which was a PR strategy which said seize the narrative,
Yeah.
okay? And part of seizing the narrative was planting people in every organization that could be anti fluorocarbon. And so there was a while there was an organization, the American Outdoor Industry Association, which had a chemical working group, and their chemical advisor was a chap who worked for DuPont.
Right.
So that was really quite problematic. And the other thing is that interestingly, there was an outdoor industry show called ISPO, and Greenpeace had got hold of the fluorocarbon thing. We're
Yeah.
talking, I think, 2015, something like this. Greenpeace had got hold of the whole fluorocarbon thing, and they were banned from this outdoor show,
Yeah.
which was interesting, which was from the influence from the Americans. And we actually organized with Greenpeace a massive press conference, which we filled with about 100 press, and
Yeah.
did a full scientific expose on the whole thing. But anyway, that's history. But at that point, we started to be on the right side of things.
Well, there's a great, you say it's history, but there's a great analogy with today because, there's a huge amount of, well, not so, even so much climate misinformation anymore. That's started to fade, I think, but sort of anti-net zero, anti-renewables
Mm.
misinformation, and a lot of it can be traced back to vested interests. So there's nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look up on Chat GPT and ask how much money has been spent in the United States on what they now call climate hushing,
Yeah,
I think the figure that Chat GPT comes up with is $7 billion.
yeah, incredible amount, which could be spent on clean energy, of course.
No, but I mean, hushing in the United States is obviously much bigger than Europe
Yeah,
and Britain, but it is affecting people's attitude to climate change.
yeah,
Certainly, the fossil fuel industry has spent a vast amount of money and energy in trying to cover it up.
yeah, and
And it's
even
very similar to the fluorocarbon
yeah.
industry. They work in the same way.
Yeah, it's the same playbook. And even in this year's COP meeting,
Yeah.
I think the if you put the all the fossil fuel lobbyists together, they were the second biggest delegation there after the host Brazilians.
Yeah.
So going back to your story, you not content with creating this new brand and of waterproofing, you then decided to find a an outdoor clothing company, Paramo. So how did that evolve from Nikwax?
That evolved because what we'd done at Nikwax was to address the problem of waterproofing chemicals or reproofing chemicals being all solvent based. So set about devising some products that were water based, and we had devised a product that you could use in a washing machine to replace the water repellency on a jacket. Um, and that gave me the idea of thinking, well, okay, I mean, we understood very well why jackets failed, waterproof jackets failed. They largely failed because of the membrane or coating on the inside, which would eventually wear out.
Mm-hmm.
And I started thinking, well, there must be some way in which we could devise a fabric system which didn't require this kind of vulnerable coating, but which we could restore by putting the jacket in a washing machine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in the end, I think it was one night, it was 3 o'clock in the morning, actually, I suddenly realized how mammals actually keep themselves dry and thought, well, I wonder if we could apply this to a textile system. Um, and then started experimenting with that, and that was the beginning of that business. So it was purely problem solving, really.
Yeah.
It wasn't commercial at all to begin with.
And this is the Nikwax biological analogy.
That's right. Yeah,
Yes.
that was the analogy. Yeah.
Is this a trade secret, or can you explain how they keep dry?
No, not really. I mean, after a while, we decided that the best plan to promote the jackets was just to point out the fact that people liked them,
Yeah.
because the technology was a bit difficult to explain. But essentially, if you look at a dog, um, there are various things about that dog, but one is that it's a cylinder, which is quite useful,
Mm-hmm.
and the other thing is that it has short, medium, and long hairs. And what that means is that as you get further away from the skin, the hairs get further away from each other.
Yeah.
So you also have on those hairs water repellency, which is natural water repellency, which is secreted onto those hairs, which means that any water droplets that appear or enter those hairs will actually be trying to form themselves into a globule.
Yeah.
And they naturally try to form themselves into a globule. And if they form into a globule where the hairs are very tightly packed, they will move to where the hairs are less tightly packed. So actually, the whole system pushes water out,
Right.
and that's exacerbated or enhanced, is better to say. Depends in whether you're in the way or not. I mean, if you're next to a dog that's just been swimming and it shakes,
Yeah.
it's actually making use of that function, and you know that water's being shot out at you,
Yeah.
and that's a combination of this hair structure,
Yeah.
the natural water repellency that's secreted onto the hair, and the fact that the dog's basically a cylinder.
Right.
So all of that means that as you get further away from the skin on the dog, the distance between the hairs gets greater, and the water droplets want to go to where the distance between the hairs is greater. And we managed to match that in a lining fabric, and then combine that with another fabric to produce something which is kind of a pump.
Yeah. It sounds like something would be quite complex to manufacture. Is that fair to say?
Well, in some ways, yes, but in other ways not, because there were specific ways that you had to put the garments together, but they didn't need any sort of sealing tapes or anything like that, and you could mend them with a needle and thread,
Yeah.
and they still worked.
Well,
And the other thing is they lasted incredibly well,
yeah.
which is the main thing. And the other thing that we did was that in the end, we focused on just using polyester fabric so that the whole garment could be recycled. That was the aim, which I believe is happening.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Somewhere in the bookcase behind me is Janine Benyus's book, Biomimicry. And I've
Yeah,
always loved solutions that are taken from nature because evolution's got an interesting way of finding solutions to problems that we can copy. And that sounds,
yeah. I think biomimicry is the answer to many things, really.
yeah. So again, when I was looking up the websites of the two companies and their net zero commitments. I appreciate that, again, this is probably um, post your leadership of the two companies. It was the same target. So are the two companies still interwoven, or are they completely independent?
They are. When I sold the companies, I sold them to a what's called an employment ownership trust.
Yeah,
And there's one company which belongs to that ownership trust, which is called Gearform, and that owns both Paramo and Nikwax.
right.
So that they have quite a lot in common. Yeah.
So it's no surprise that they've adopted the same net
No, I mean
target.
they share certain facilities. So they share the accounting department, for example.
Yeah. Was it a difficult decision to walk away?
It was a very hard thing to do, but
Mm.
not how can I put this? By the time I left, I'd been doing it for 45 years,
Yeah.
and being responsible for hundreds of people is something that you could quite leave behind without too much trauma. Um, I think what's more difficult is leaving behind sort of control over policy and all of that sort of stuff, which
Yeah.
is why I try very hard not to be involved with them these days.
Yeah.
Um, Not that necessarily they're doing something that I don't like, but simply just because I think as a control freak, that's something you should put in a box and and put on the shelf, really.
Yeah. But you did leave one commitment to them, didn't you? The 1% funding.
Yes, so as part of the deal, they got a pretty good deal. There was a commitment to for 1% of the turnover to go into social or environmental stuff, whatever that was going to be. We hadn't defined what. Um, and it took quite a long while to work out how we would do that. And in the end, it made sense to take that money and put it into a new organization. So we eventually, or I eventually started up a new charity which is now called Green Levers,
Yeah.
which is making use of that money. And essentially, there were two reasons, well, more than two, but several reasons for making that choice. Um, One is that if you've got an organization, you can have a consistency of policy and strategy. So you can always be helping similar sorts of things. So you're likely to have a more positive effect, I think. And the other is that we would like to be able to raise more money if we're effective, and do more than just what we could do with the money that comes from Nikwax and Paramo, which is not insubstantial, but we can improve on it.
Yeah. And what does Green Levers do then? What's its purpose?
Well, I started the business from being one person in a shed, basically.
Mm.
So I had experience of all the different stages and sizes that a business can be. And I think that from that you learn that actually if someone had helped you with some of the sort of basic nuts and bolts of how you do things at an early stage, you could probably have advanced an awful lot more quickly. And the same applies to small charities. Um, Very often they're incredibly good at delivering what they deliver, but not very good at sorting out their organization or promoting themselves. Um, so the idea was to look for people who had passion, who were doing amazing things, and inject some help, maybe some practical advice, but also some money at a time which would be significant to their growth. Um, and because we spent so many years working in Colombia, at the moment we're working only with Colombian NGOs, but that will change in due course.
because Paramo products are manufactured in Colombia. Is that?
Yeah, because Paramo products were manufactured in Colombia, and in fact, almost by accident, we ended up using actually setting up a foundation that helped people out of prostitution to do the manufacturing for Paramo. So for 30 years, we were basically helping people in that way.
Yeah.
And eventually, the ladies in the factory became partners in the business. So the now the employ the um, Employment Ownership Trust actually includes the Colombian ladies.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet you they couldn't have seen that future for themselves.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
No. I mean, that was an amazing outcome, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And what sort of so can you give us some examples of some of the organizations you're supporting?
Yeah. So we're very focused on environment. So one of the organizations is um, a nature reserve, and it's called the Biodiversity Foundation, Colombian Biodiversity Foundation. Their primary work is in a nature reserve in what's called Magdalena Medio, which is in the middle of Colombia,
Mhm.
with a reserve of 3,500 hectares. And the Colombian biodiversity is amazing, but it's also very threatened.
Mhm.
So we've been helping them actually with helping them to finance their communications, which is great because they've just managed to get. We didn't give them that much money, but they've just managed to attract another 2 million to buy a whole lot more land. So what we went in and we helped them to define their identity better and a few other things. Then we gave them money effectively for a communications department. So that's one.
Yeah.
Another one is a very small organization which is focusing on providing school dinners for in places where people are suffering from malnutrition
Yeah.
in Colombia. And Colombia is actually kind of a funny mixture because it has areas which are extremely poor and areas which could be anywhere in Europe, to be honest.
Yeah.
But this particular group of people are focusing on a couple of areas, one of which is an indigenous area in the northeast of the country,
Mhm.
where people don't even have running water. And they've provided running water and they've provided a canteen for local children and they're growing that. So they're a really great, it's a couple actually running it. They're amazing.
Yeah.
Um, so we've helped them with various bits and pieces. We will also help them with their communications, but we've also been helping them with financing, getting professionals in to make sure they're compliant with everything they need to be as effectively as a sort of school canteen
Yeah.
system.
So when you say communications, who and what who are they communicating to and what message is it that you're helping them refine?
Well, it depends on which organization it is.
Yeah.
But what you tend to find is that people, small organizations, they know what they're doing, but they're not terribly good at voicing it.
Hmm.
Um, so what we do when we start with a new organization is that we look for the 8 or 10 primary stakeholders who may be people who are working in the canteen, for example,
Hmm.
and we ask them some very basic questions, which is, what's great about your organization? What are the challenges that you have? How would you like to see it develop in the future? And what would you like to achieve in the future?
Yeah.
And if you go about getting all that information and then you mash it all together, and then you come up with from that a document which looks like a purpose, which
Hmm.
can be quite a large document, hand it back to them, they suddenly get really excited and say, do we really do all of that? And then they come back and they produce a wonderful, they edit it, they improve on it. And I've just been working on that with the guys with the canteen.
Yeah.
And they say, well, actually, we've realized this is what we've been doing all along. but actually being able to express that is incredibly important for raising money.
Yeah. Well, I think the last bit sort of explains what I was angling after. Is this for, a pitch to other funders to bring cash in to expand their
No, no,
operations?
absolutely. It's a
Yeah.
pitch to it the stronger, the greater the clarity of the identity of an organization, especially if it's a charitable organization, um, the better it will work because the better that will the people that are working within it understand what they're doing, but also the people that they interact with in terms of funding, they will better understand what's going on. And that's an important stage in growing their fundraising, basically.
So who is, what kind of funders are likely to, if we take the Biodiversity Foundation, what sort of organizations or individuals are likely to be putting money into a group like that?
They're actually doing very, very well in terms of funding because they get funding from conservation organizations in North America and in Europe.
Yeah,
Um, so they're that what is interesting though is that they what they find quite difficult is to get funding for their operational management. They
yeah,
get funding to buy more land. They get funding to have a project for a particular bird or mammal,
yeah,
but getting funding to actually run their guardians or wardens rather is much more difficult.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, we've been working on that with them, and actually the that something else comes in there because in order to get funding for operational costs, you have to be able to show what you're doing.
yeah,
So part of the work would be helping them to divert to clarify what measures they put in terms of their performance, which are all kind of business type things actually.
yeah.
But for someone who's absolutely idée fixe, focused on conservation, doesn't kind of occur to them necessarily.
Yeah, and then circling back to your experience with the World Land Trust, is any
Yeah.
of this sort of in the form of carbon credits, or is it are they simply looking for donations to allow them to expand their activities?
Yeah, carbon credits I I've looked a lot at carbon credits, and actually Fundación Biodiversa have managed to become their own developer for carbon credits. So they're doing very well. So they're managing to sell some carbon credits actually, or in theory, at least they've produced them. I'm not sure if they've sold them yet.
Yeah,
Um, Unfortunately, carbon credits for a lot of organizations don't necessarily come up with the goods
yeah,
because within the sort of carbon credit business, it is a business and it's a market. And I've really looked into it. And probably in 9 out of 10 cases, anything up to 80 or 90% of the money is going into the market and not actually arriving at ground level.
yeah,
Um, but Fundación Biodiversa have actually taken control of that, which is great. So carbon credits are potentially a really good way of helping nature reserves to look after their operational costs.
yeah.
But at the moment, I wouldn't say that it was actually working globally.
No, no, there are high profile examples of it not working in places, but there does seem to be a sort of as well a sort of pseudo carbon credit scheme which is somewhere between a Western company offsetting and a donation to a charity where they sort of work out a an offsetting scheme, but it's a lot less transactional than the open market.
Yeah, I mean, my if this there's a few things going on, but I don't know if you've come across the TFFF.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah,
So we have to spell that out for our listeners.
tropical forest. Goodness, you can tell me what it
Oh,
is.
I'll have to Google it while we're keep talking and I'll Google it.
Anyway, it's an organization which is at country level,
Yeah.
and the concept is that um, people who are looking after forests should be rewarded for looking after forests.
Yeah.
If in the process of doing that, and certainly this will be the case, they are also looking after carbon stores, then that's great.
Yeah.
But what you're actually going to pay for is looking after the forests.
Yeah.
And I think that is the right approach. I mean, because I don't honestly think that trading in carbon probably is in a long term going to work out too well for the forests. I mean, we're in a situation where one of the problems is forest fires, particularly in the Amazonas,
Yeah.
and in many places around the world, actually. And I think in 24 in Peru, as much carbon was released through forest fires as the entire carbon budget for UK.
Yeah. It's quite extraordinary.
So that gives you some idea of how important the forests actually are.
Yeah.
And the tropical forests have got, absolutely mega amounts of carbon in them. And they're not only capable of protecting that carbon, but they can also sequester carbon. But the amount of money that's being spent on them in comparison to the amount of money that's being spent on trying to control carbon emissions is pathetic, to be honest.
Yeah. It's the I've got the other F's up here. It's the Tropical Forest Forever facility,
There
which
you
is
go.
a bit of a tongue twister.
Every time I see that, I forget it again.
Yes, I was trying to.
I
I had
think
tropical forest, and then I got
I,
lost.
I think there needs to be some kind of marketing man getting in there. But it is making progress. They are making progress, and it's been promoted by the Brazilian government, the Colombian government, the Norwegian government, and a few other governments, and it is very much focused on coming up with money to protect forests as opposed to coming up with money to buy and trade carbon credits.
Yeah, yes, it aims to raise $125 billion to pay tropical nations roughly $4 per hectare annually for standing forests. So it's
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's a very good start, and that might almost deal with fire protection. But when we've been looking at it, it might cost as much as $50 a hectare um, to look after the forest.
yeah,
But a hectare of forest could be sequestering 5 tons of carbon dioxide in a year,
yeah,
which actually, if it was sold on the open market in Europe, that carbon dioxide would be worth $500.
yeah. So rather than four.
So that the whole economy of that side of things needs looking at.
Okay, we've been chatting for some time. My final question, I like to try and sort of sum up with some reflections. So I was thinking if an entrepreneur, a young entrepreneur came to you today with an idea like Nikwax, but fully getting at the time they or fully aiming for the sort of green market, what advice would you give them from your experience of launching these brands?
Well, I think the first advice I would give to any entrepreneur would be definitely don't try to reinvent the wheel as far as your organizational structure is concerned. Just go and get some advice on how you do your accounting and how you do your organization. Because I think we wasted a vast amount of time on that. And we probably would have progressed more quickly. More specifically for an environmental entrepreneur, I think that you need to be absolutely clear about what you want to achieve and where your boundaries are going to be in terms of what you do, because any product that you produce is going to be effectively releasing carbon dioxide. So what you're going to be doing is doing something that's better than, rather than something that's absolutely purest, the best absolutely ever. And better than is worth a lot. So, I mean, as far as our waterproofing products are concerned, we used chemicals which came from the petroleum industry. And why did we do that? Because we actually needed to waterproof leather boots.
Yeah.
And if we had not done that and we tried to do everything with beeswax and lanolin, then we would have ended up not waterproofing boots and we'd have not sold anything.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we decided not to use chemicals that were known to be toxic and not to use chemicals which are known to be persistent.
Mhm.
And so there are some lines that you can draw. So it's actually drawing out those boundaries very clearly, I think. And that, I suppose for us, those boundaries were in my head for a long time, and then eventually they became written down. But those boundaries are important. You can achieve a lot without having to achieve perfection, I think is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And the old saying, perfection is the enemy of success.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Well, thank you very much for that, Nick. I think those were very wise words. Just leaves me to thank you for joining me today and talking through the history of those fantastic brands.
Well, thank you very much, and it was a pleasure. And warm greetings to all of your listeners.
Yep. Thank you. And good luck for Green Levers and everybody who's going to benefit from that obviously very worthwhile venture.
Thank you.